now he's here back tonight. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Good evening, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome to Ahavat Shalom. It's wonderful to have all of you here with us in the sanctuary, and Shabbat Shalom to all of you who are tuning in from at home. We have got a very special evening for our Shabbat live service. The music of Carole King and James Taylor. I've gone with my pretty much best and only 70s t-shirt, the flowery thing that I'm wearing. Don't have any bell bottoms, but maybe one day, I'm Rabbi Matt Berger, and on the bima next to me are soloist Allison Rosoff and our bassist Dan Kolaski and Cade Masoto, who is our percussionist, and down at the piano with another beautiful hat is our accompanist, Joy Katzen-Guthrie. I like seeing the different hats, and you never know what you're going to get or expect. So this is going to be a unique service because for the 7 songs that are either Carole King or James Taylor, what I've done is I call it shoehorning the Hebrew into the melody of the songs. And in certain cases, for certain prayers, I've added some English. You'll be able to follow along all of it with the screens before you. So without further ado, we're going to start with a Carole King song called I Feel the Earth Move. 2, 3, 4. Printed in the Shabbat booklet, but many thanks to our Shabbat Live sponsor watching from home, Norma Van Ness, in memory of her late husbands, Al Bloomberg and Colonel Lee Van Ness. Shout out to you, Norma. We're going to light the candles now, getting us in the mood by singing Debbie Friedman's Light These Lights, and the blessing is on page 2. To you, God, for the commandment, the mitzvah of lighting the Shabbos lights. In honor of the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who the nation will celebrate on Monday, I'd like to share a small selection from his 1963 I Have a Dream speech, which I'll talk about later. In spite of the difficulties and frustrations of the moment, we still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. We have a dream that one day this nation shall rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal. We have a dream that little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of the skin, but by the content of their character. We have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, and the glory of the eternal shall be revealed, and all of us shall see it together. To this I say, Cain Yehiratzon, may this soon come to pass in our own days and in our lifetime. We're now going to move to one of the Kabbalat Shabbat songs. On page 10 in your prayer books, you'll find the words to Yidid Nefesh, Heart's Delight, Source of Mercy, to Carole King's You've Got a Friend. Before preparing for this, I actually thought this was a James Taylor song. He just happened to do a very fine cover of this song written by Carole King. I hope you enjoyed it.
Heart's
turn out to the words of Lecha Dodi. You'll find them right on the screen in your prayer book, your Sidurim, page 20 and 21. And we get to the final verse where we ask the Shabbat bride to come in peace, Boiva Shalom. I can't really ask you to rise. I'll be using both of my hands simultaneously, but we'll rise for that one and face the doorway. And Lecha Dodi we're going to do to one of my favorite all-time James Taylor songs, Sweet Baby James. Shamor v'zachor b'diborecha Ish mi'anu el ha'myuchad Adonai echad u'shmo echad L'shem u'tiferet li'pilah Likrat Shabbat l'chuven elcha Ki mekor ha'bracha Merosh mikedem nesucha Sof ma'aseh b'shmat tehilah Beloved, come, let's greet Shabbat. Chadodi likrat Allah, b'nei Shabbat yekabelah. Chadodi likrat Allah, b'nei Shabbat yekabelah. B'nei Shabbat yekabelah. Feel free to be seated. Hope you enjoyed that version of Lecha Dodi, Come, My Beloved, the Sabbath Bride. We'll continue on 26, chanting the words of the Half Kaddish.
Yikadav Yikadash Shmei Rabba B'yamad Yivrach Yurtei V'yam Lichmachutei B'chayechon U'v'yom Echon U'chayed Kol Beit Yisrael Bagala Bagala U'v'yizman Kariv V'yimaru Amen Yishmei Rabba Mevorach Le'olam Ulam Le'amaya Yitbarach Yitbarach V'yirtabach V'yipa'ar V'yiroman V'yinasei V'yithadar V'yidaleh V'yidhalal Shemei Dekudesha Brichu Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata Tushbechata v'nechemata Tamira v'hama V'yimaru Amen.
Let's rise to the call of worship, the Barhu. Feel free to join with me on page 31, prayer for the evening. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'ma'ariv Aravim. And words of love, Ahavat Olam, on the bottom of 33. Wisdom and wonder, passion and instruction, story and symbol. All these things your Torah gives to us. And the more we devote ourselves to it, the more it grows and gives. What could be a truer token of your abiding love than this holiest of your works in the living language that gives it form? Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Hamo Yisrael. Sing, open up our eyes.
Open up our eyes, teach us how to live, fill our hearts with joy and all the love you have to give. Gather us in peace as you lead us to your name, and we will know
Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. Feel free to be seated. As we continue chanting the words of the Shema, you shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, soul, and might, page 36. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'odecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'eleh asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha uv'lechnecha v'aderech uv'shoftecha uv'kumecha uv'shartam le'od al yadecha v'hayu lekotafot bein einecha uv'tavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'tem kedoshim le'Elohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem. Let's continue our prayer for freedom, which I'll also talk about later on during my sermon on page 39, Words of Truth and Faith. Please join me. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we are taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt. There is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands, marching together. And for Who Is Like You, Mi Kamocha, we're going to be singing this to James Taylor's Carolina in My Mind. 3, 4. Kamocha by Limadonai, Mi Kamocha Nedar Bakodesh, Torah Tehilo, Osef Eleh, Torah Tehilo, Osef Eleh, Utecha Rahu Vanecha. Then a man named Nachshon stood and walked ahead of them and said, "Come with me." And they said, "This is our God, we'll go right behind." Nedar Bakodesh, Norah Tehilo. Thus it is said, Adonai redeemed Jacob from a hand stronger than his own. Praise are you, Adonai, for redeeming Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael. So one of the things I like to do is play the favorites of whatever artist, or in this case artists, that we're doing, but I also like to put in at least one deep cut. So this is the deep cut is like for the true fans and aficionados. So Hashkivenu, which is our prayer of shelter and protection, it's on 42 and the screen. It's going to be a mix of Hebrew and English, is going to be sung to Carole King's Blossom. Da 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 Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom V'hamidenu Shomreinu L'chaim Ufros Aleinu. May we all lie down in peace, let God raise us up. Shelter the people with your strength. May we find ourselves renewed. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom V'hamidenu Shomreinu L'chaim Ufros Aleinu. May we all lie down in peace, let God raise us up renewed. Shelter the people with your strength, may we find ourselves renewed. Yada da 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 da. Yada da 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 da. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel, whose shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people Israel, and over Jerusalem. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukat shalom aleinu v'al kol amo Yisrael v'al Yerushalayim. We're going to continue our Shabbat prayer with the words of Adonai Sifatai Tiftach, the Amida, or the standing prayer, which begins on page 46. I'll invite all of us to rise, and the prayer continues on even pages.
Adonai Sifatai Tiftach ufi agida hilatecha. Eternal God, open my lips that my mouth may declare your glory. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, v'Chonei Hakol, v'Zocher Chastei Avot v'Imot, u'mevir Gola livnei v'neihem, L'ma'an Shemo ve'hava, Melech Ozer u'Moshia u'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, Ve'ezrat Sarah, אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל, אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומרעיד הגשם, מחלחל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי הכל.
אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום, יעלוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש. Feel free to be seated. We'll continue with the blessings in the middle of the Amidah, blessings 4, 5, and 6. First, for the preciousness of Shabbat and keeping it separate and apart from the rest of the week. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh ha-Shabbat. Prayer asking that God's presence will remain with us here, wherever we are, and especially in the land of Israel. Baruch atah Adonai ha-Machazir shechinato l'Tzion. And our prayer of thanksgiving and gratitude called the Hoda'ah. Baruch atah Adonai Hatov Shimcha Uhana'eh Lechodot. And the final blessing of the Amidah is always for peace, Birkat Shalom, found on page 60 in your prayer books. Grant abundant peace, Shalom Rav, to Israel, your people forever. For you are the sovereign God of all peace. May it be pleasing to you to bless your people Israel in every season and moment with your peace. Blessed are you, Adonai, who blesses your people Israel with peace. Baruch atah Adonai, hamvarech et amo Yisrael b'shalom. The next passage we're going to share with you in song is Vishamru, keeping and guarding and observing Shabbat. You'll find the Hebrew and also I added some English lyrics on the screen before you. And this is to James Taylor's Fire and Rain. Vishamru, B'nai Yisrael, et HaShabbat, Lasot et HaShabbat, L'Doros HaBerit Olam. It's time for us to keep Shabbat, to light the candles and drink the Sabbath wine. For in 6 days God created all the earth. On the 7th day we rest and feel refreshed. B'nai Yisrael, oti le'olam, Ishesh et yamim asa Adonai, et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz, u'bayom hashvi'i Shabbat vayinafash. It's time for us to keep Shabbat, to light the candles and drink the Sabbath wine. For in 6 days God created all the earth. On the seventh day we rest and feel refreshed. Turn now to words of healing and strength and courage. Words of Mishaberach, God the one who blesses those who are ill, found on 253. We think of the following individuals for prayers of healing: Yonatan Ruvain ben Rivka, Charlie Burke, Norma Bloomberg, Lisa Cargile, Elise Cohen, Manuel Cruz, Eddie Deerfield, Evelyn Edelman, Rob Edelman, Heather Felser, Brad Fischelow, Sue Fischelow, Harry Fleisch, Denise Freifeld, Mitchell Freifeld, Jerry Gottlieb, Leah Gottlieb, Rick Kornspan, Arthur Maller, Ray Mancari, Ed Marks, Bob Masarski, Arnold Miller, William Miller, Stephanie Ross, Phyllis Schachter, Sarah Chagrin, Arlene Charlotte, Jeff Stark, and Phoebe Tave. We, of course, think of all those both in the States and throughout the world who are ill as a result of the pandemic. And if there are any other names you'd like to add for healing at this time, feel free.
My father, George Stark. Misheberach Avotenu Mikor habracha Limotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach imotenu mikor habracha leavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
On May 30th, 1922, the Lincoln Memorial was dedicated in Washington, D.C. President Lincoln's only surviving son, Robert Todd, was a special guest. Upon reaching his seat, the crowd gave him an ovation, though he didn't speak. Rather, he listened intently to those praising and talking about his father. Dr. Robert Morton, the spiritual successor of Booker T. Washington, delivered the keynote speech, which, to no one's surprise, promoted equality among all people. After all, this is what Abraham Lincoln fought and died for. Dr. Moten was the second president of the Tuskegee Institute in Atlanta, in Alabama. During his tenure, he added a department for training teachers and worked to support black doctors and nurses at the Tuskegee Veterans Hospital. The officiant at the dedication was William Howard Taft, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Back in 1911, Taft signed the bill to create the Lincoln Memorial while serving as our 27th president. He noted, here on the banks of the Potomac, the boundary between two sections is a particularly appropriate place that the memorial should stand. Today, visitors who climb the marble steps of the Lincoln Memorial, better in dry weather than in wet because they're slippery, they have a commanding view of the National Mall, the Washington Monument, and the U.S. Capitol. It's a beautiful building and a fitting tribute to a great leader. But in the course of time, the memorial has come to represent far more to the American people, in large part because of two important events that symbolize the ongoing struggle to extend freedom to everyone, regardless of the color of their skin. The first event took place on the steps of the memorial on April 9th, Easter Sunday, 1939, when America's best-known classical singer, Marian Anderson, sang before a crowd of 75,000 people. The concert was originally scheduled to take place at nearby Constitution Hall. However, she was denied the opportunity to sing there simply because she was African American. At that time, Constitution Hall had a white artist-only policy. And while many people petitioned the Daughters of the American Revolution who owned the hall, including the First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, the request fell on deaf ears. Roosevelt subsequently gave up her membership in the DAR. The concert was path-breaking for the nation and for the Lincoln Memorial. Many people look back at this concert as the perfect blending of the arts and politics. In the wake of the Lincoln Memorial concert, the DAR recognized the need for change, and Marian Anderson later sang at Constitution Hall on a number of occasions. The group now practices a non-discrimination policy and celebrates diversity within the organization. This past February, a documentary about Marian Anderson called Voice of Freedom was aired on the PBS series American Experience. It included never-before-released information from archival documents which shed light on what happens behind the scenes leading up to this concert. The second event is even more well-known, taking place at the Lincoln Memorial, and endures as a high watermark for the civil rights movement, when over 250,000 people gathered on August 28, 1963, for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, where, standing on the 18th step of the monument, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered one of the most memorable speeches in American history, I Have a Dream. He recognized the symbolic importance of the Lincoln Memorial, and King noted that Lincoln's signing of the Emancipation Proclamation was a great beacon of light and hope to millions of slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. At the same time, he also lamented that African Americans were still not totally free. Reverend King, an award-winning orator, drew many powerful images from his understanding of the Bible in general, and more specifically, the power of the Exodus story, which gave hope to many freedom groups, and especially to the African American community in its darkest moments. And moreover, he embraced the prophetic vision of Moses, our great leader who embodied the Torah's enduring system of values. Taken together, these stories about the Lincoln Memorial can be seen as a powerful thread, a thread that connects Abraham Lincoln, Marian Anderson, and Martin Luther King Jr. all the way back to Moses and the Exodus, and to this week's Torah portion called Bishalach, when the Pharaoh finally, at long last, decided to let the Israelites go. Here, the initial thread of freedom was woven. After crossing the Red Sea, the Israelites praised God. They watched Pharaoh's army drown in the crash of the waves, and they sang the song of Shirat Hayam, the song of the sea. And many times, this Shabbat included, the Sabbath of Song, Shabbat Shirah, occurs the very same weekend as we celebrate the life and works of Martin Luther King. Here in this song, we find the words of Mi Chamocha, who is like you, our song of freedom. We sing this prayer at every single service, so it's quite familiar to us. Yet if we look at the text in the Torah scroll, it's evident that something special is going on. Normally, when we look at a text in a Torah scroll laid out before us, it's almost entirely filled with Hebrew letters. You can see the typical layout here in this slide. The text is right and left justified, and if you look right to the left of the yod or pointer, you can see in that there's barely any, if very few spaces at all. In the column on the right, you have a little bit more spaces, but for the most part, it's about 98 to 100% text. The text found in the Song of the Sea in this week's Torah portion, however, is quite unique. It retains the same right and left justification, and this is a picture of our actual Torah that I took earlier today. It's the same right and left justification as the other 247 columns of Torah, but in every line of Hebrew text, the individual passages are separated or interrupted by spaces, and you can see the effect right there. Our sages immediately recognized the difference, and to no one's surprise, they had something to say about it. In the section of the Talmud called Megillot, or scrolls, the rabbis noted that the Song of the Sea is meant to resemble a brick wall with interlocking pieces. You can see how they overlap from one line to the next. Just a little bit of overlap, but it makes them interlocking. Now, when I was a kid, I was taught about this particular passage, and it was said that the bricks in mortar were meant to resemble the building materials that the Israelite slaves used to build the pyramids and the like during their 400 years of servitude. It's not a bad explanation, but the Talmudic one, in my opinion, is far better because it speaks to the importance and meaning of strength and leadership. If you were to build a tower of simple blocks, one stacked on top of the other, it would eventually topple, much like the game Jenga, the one where you take a little wooden block out and you try and put it right at the top of the pile without the whole thing tipping over, which ends the game. The higher the tower rises, the more wobbly it gets. To this day, I still love playing Jenga. It's a great game for kids, and it's a great game for adults. On the other hand, interlocking bricks provide far greater strength. The example that comes to mind is the Kotel, or Western Wall in Jerusalem. Due to its proximity to where the Jerusalem temple once stood, you'll find that the largest stones at the bottom, and God knows how they actually lifted and moved those, date back to the Herodian period. They're all interlocking as it goes from the bottom to the top of the wall, and the stones get smaller as you go up, the rest being built in the 1600s during the Ottoman Empire in the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent. What a name. What's important to note is that all of those stones, they're not stacked one atop the other, but they're all interlaced and interconnected, which, given the fact that the Western Wall supports the weight of at least a quarter of the Temple Mount, it needs to be very, very strong. Great leaders like Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., as well as Moses, are blessed with many strengths. Now, strength can come in many forms. First, there's physical strength, but then there's also the strength of faith and belief. All of these leaders, to a greater or lesser extent, base their worldview on biblical passages. MLK especially often quoted the Bible when speaking and writing to justify the righteousness of the cause of civil rights. Then there is the strength of wisdom. Dr. King passed the entrance exam to Morehouse College in Atlanta when he was 15, and he completed seminary training and earned a PhD by the time he was 26, which is pretty impressive. Yet, unlike others who believe that violence could be used to hasten the pace of civil rights reform, Dr. King fought his battles with ideas and nonviolence. It was a brilliant pivot that allowed him to fight from a much higher moral and ethical ground. And while Dr. King had many other strengths, it was clear that he always spoke with great clarity and purpose. His words, simply put, inspired other people to act. Just imagine the pressure that he must have felt standing on that 18th step of the Lincoln Memorial before hundreds of thousands of people on the National Mall. The ideas and convictions he shared in the I Have a Dream speech are timeless. To this day, they still call upon us to become better, more loving people. People made B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God. Without a doubt, we still have a long way to go when it comes to equality and civil rights. There's no doubt about that. But many of our greatest leaders, from Lincoln to Marian Anderson, from Moses to the Reverend Dr. King Jr., have taught us that hope will eventually prevail over hate, and that doing good in the world, which in Judaism we call tikkun olam, making the world a better place, should still be our highest priority as Jews, as a community, and as individuals. So this Shabbat and throughout the long weekend, let us call to mind and to heart the enduring words and wisdom of our tradition, as well as the vision of modern-day prophets like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Shabbat Shalom. We're going to continue now with the words of Aleinu, the adoration. I'll ask all of us to rise. You can find these words on the bottom of page 282 or right on the screen.
Aleinu l'shabech l'adon hakol, l'atid gedula leotzer bereshit, shelo asanu kigli haratzot, velo samanu k'mishpechot hadama, shelo sam kelkinu kahem, v'gor ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני נלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
Feel free to be seated. You'll find the words to the Mourner's Kaddish, Kaddish Tome, on page 294. We think first of families who are in the period of Shloshim, the first 30 days, mourning their loved one. So we remember Telo Bagaj, father of our own Gimme Bagaj, Peggy Gerson, former temple member and longtime area educator, Richard Baker, father of Ellen Weiss, Phyllis Allman, mother of Eve Goldstein, David Gordon, relative of Dorsey Rose, Larry Irwin, brother of Elaine Wolstein, and we note the recent passing of Heidi Blaine, husband of Bruce Hedberg. We also mark the yahrzeit, the anniversary of death of loved ones, on this Shabbat as we remember the following individuals: Benjamin Edelman, Cynthia Fagel Abramson, Hugo Freudenthal, Scott Friedman, John Guerin, William Harris, Molly Hout, Harry Hutton, Shirley Konigsberg, Celia Markowitz, Louise Marks, Mary Newman, Hilda Pascal, Eugene Pizer, Mildred Fetterman-Plotnick, Harold Richmond, Edward Rose, Shirley Rusoff, Francisco Scheel, Frida Seaman, Jenny Secundi, Saul Weboff, Edith Weiss, Sarah Weibel, and Seema Rivkin Zimmerman. To these names we also remember those who have died recently due to the pandemic. And this time, if there are any other names to add for Kaddish remembrance at this time, feel free to recite their names aloud. We say, Zichronam Livracha, may the memories of all of these good people continue to be a blessing for their loved ones as we rise to offer the words of Kaddish praise together. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, v'yalmad divrach hirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayeda kol beit Yisrael, v'agalav v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabbah mevarach le'alam u'lamei almayah, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal, shemei dekudusha b'richu, le'ela min kol birkata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran v'yalma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabbah min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mramav, kuya asei shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who causes peace in the heavens cause peace to descend on us, Israel, and throughout the world as we say, amen.
V'imru, 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 amen. V'imru, 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 amen.
Feel free to be seated as we continue with the Shabbat Kiddush right on the screen before you. Prayer for the fruit of the vine, also on page 5 in your written prayer books. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei b'riah gafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'raktzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho, v'ava uvratzon hilanu, zikaron lema'aseh v'reishi, kihu yom tehillah, l'mikra'e kodesh, zeher l'tziat mitzrayim. Baruch atah Adonai, Elohim melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Amen.
So I hope you've enjoyed the service thus far. I had a lot of fun putting this together, and many thanks once again to our Shabbat Live band, to Allison, to Joy, to Dan, and to Cade for making this truly a special evening of music. I'd like to thank our three-man tech crew, Bruce Lowett and Steve Koenigsberg and Mike Abdisi, who is our sound engineer for this evening. Once again, much gratitude to Norma Van Ness for graciously sponsoring this Shabbat Live service. Tomorrow morning, for the first time here in probably a year and a half or more, we're going to be having a Shabbat morning service minyan. We're going to gather here at 9 o'clock. Early bird gets the worm. This is a 1-hour service led by our own Dr. Ron Gilbert and myself. I've already contacted all the B'nai Mitzvah coming up, and we have at least a couple, maybe 3, that are coming. It's a wonderful opportunity to prepare for a bar and bat mitzvah as well. Starting on January 18th, on Tuesday, for 3 weeks running, I'll be leading a 3-session adult ed series on Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. And next Friday, we have a special service as well, not only because it starts 30 minutes earlier at 7 p.m., but it's a more inclusive Shabbat worship booklet that'll also be on the screen, our intergenerational Shabbat service, great for all ages, families, and kids. And it's going to be led by probably about 10 or so members of our youth group in middle school and high school, along with Allison, Joy, and myself. Right after services and our closing song and blessing, those who are here in the sanctuary can feel free to join us outside. It's a little chilly tonight, but it should be very, very nice for an Oneg Shabbat. We will be concluding the service. Our final song is the poem Adon Olam. It's found on 321, but you're much better served looking at the screen for this one, because in order to put this together, I had to maneuver some Hebrew to make it all flow and work. And this is our 4th James Taylor song, Something in the Way She Moves. 2, 3, 4. Don Olam Hashem Allah, Terem Ko Yitzir Nivra, Le'et Nasa V'hem Soko, Zay Melech Shemo Nikra, Acharei Kiklot HaKol, Levado Yimlo. Go Ali. Adonai li velo ira. Hayavehu oven vehu yeh. Hu yeh. V'tifara. Hayavehu oven vehu yeh. Hu yeh. V'tifara, v'tifara. And we'll conclude with our prayer for health, for our own safety as the cases unfortunately keep rising, our own health, and for the sake of the health around us, the importance of wearing a mask pretty much at all times when we're in public. And feel free to join me in the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu al shmirat hanefesh, for the mitzvah and sacred obligation of protecting our life and the lives of those around us. I hope you enjoyed this special Shabbat Live, music of Carole King and James Taylor. I wish all of you a great weekend and Shabbat Shalom.